Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the explosive, previously unreleased deposition transcript concerning the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, obtained through highly confidential sources with intimate knowledge of the ongoing royal investigations. This testimony threatens to detonate the carefully curated public image of the Montecito couple. The sterile, windowless deposition room in a discreet city of London legal firm hummed with an almost unbearable, silent tension. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, sat ramrod straight, a porcelain mask of composure that barely concealed the volcanic turmoil brewing beneath. Her fingers, adorned with ethically sourced diamonds, gripped the plush armrests of her chair with a white-knuckled intensity. Beside her, Prince Harry, the once jovial people's prince, now appeared a shadow of his former self, his gaze fixed on some distant, invisible point beyond the polished mahogany table, was haunted, his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. The relentless media scrutiny, the acrimonious split from the royal family, the tell-all interviews and the multi-million-dollar Netflix deals, all had taken their toll. But what was about to unfold, a testimony from the very heart of their once private sanctuary, promised a level of public evisceration they had, perhaps naively, never anticipated. The source of this impending storm? Ms. Eleanor Davies, a pseudonym carefully chosen to shield her from the inevitable royal and media onslaught. She was Archie Mountbatten Windsor's former nanny, a woman who had witnessed, firsthand, the unfiltered reality behind the Instagram-perfect facade. For years, Miss Davies had been a silent keeper of secrets, bound by the dual chains of a draconian non-disclosure agreement and a lingering, albeit fading, sense of duty. But the whispers of a lucrative book deal, coupled with what she described as a moral imperative to correct a dangerously distorted public record, had finally unsealed her lips. This wasn't just another disgruntled ex-employee airing grievances. This was a woman who had changed Archie's nappies, soothed his infant cries, and observed, with increasing alarm, the dynamics of the Sussex household, particularly during the pivotal, and now infamous, 2019 royal tour of Southern Africa. It was during this tour, amidst the backdrop of cheering crowds and diplomatic niceties, that an incident occurred. An incident Meghan herself had selectively weaponized in her later narratives. An incident that Miss Davies was now prepared to expose in its full, unvarnished, and devastating detail. An incident that reportedly left Meghan Markle utterly distraught, but, as Ms. Davies would chillingly suggest, not for the reasons the world had been led to believe. The lead investigator, a stern-faced barrister with eyes that missed nothing, cleared his throat. Ms. Davies, please recount for the record your initial experiences upon joining the household of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Ms. Davies, a woman in her late 40s with an air of quiet dignity, adjusted the microphone. I was, initially, immensely honored and rather excited. She began, her voice calm, betraying none of the bombshells she was about to drop. I saw them as a beacon of modernity within an ancient institution. I believed I was there to support a young couple, new parents, navigating the unique pressures of their roles. My brief was simple, to care for Master Archie with the utmost discretion and professionalism. Meghan shifted almost imperceptibly in her seat. A flicker of something, annoyance, apprehension, crossed her features before being swiftly suppressed. However, Miss Davies continued, her gaze unwavering. It became apparent, rather quickly, that the private reality was starkly different from the public perception. The atmosphere within their private quarters was often fraught, tense. There was a pervasive sense of anxiety, largely emanating from the Duchess, a feeling that they were constantly under siege, constantly being undermined. Could you be more specific? Miss Davies? The investigator pressed. The Duchess often spoke of enemies within the palace, of plants in the media. She seemed to view every interaction, every piece of press, through a lens of suspicion. Prince Harry, while clearly devoted to her, often appeared to be mediating, trying to soothe her fears, to reason with her. But it was like trying to calm a rising tide. The focus of the deposition then shifted, inexorably, towards the 2019 Africa tour. The public remembered the images: Meghan dancing with locals, Harry walking through minefields, Archie making his charming debut. But Ms. Davies was about to pull back the curtain on a far more turbulent private drama. The tour was, from the outset, incredibly high stress. Miss Davies stated. The Duchess was determined for it to be a triumph, a showcase of their global appeal. But behind the smiles for the cameras, she was, if I may say, on edge. Every detail was scrutinized, every potential misstep obsessed over. And then, the incident. The fire in the nursery. Meghan had recounted this on her Archetypes podcast, a dramatic tale of rushing back to a smoke-filled room, of a shaken and in-tears reaction, of having to continue with official duties despite this trauma. It was a narrative designed to elicit sympathy, to highlight her resilience, her maternal devotion under duress. Ms. Davies' version, however, painted a vastly different and far more troubling picture. We were in Cape Town, she began, her voice now taking on a more somber tone. Master Archie was napping in the nursery of the official residence provided. The Duke and Duchess were attending a scheduled engagement. I was with Archie, along with another junior nanny. Suddenly, we smelled smoke. It wasn't a raging inferno. As has sometimes been implied, a heater in the room had malfunctioned. There was smoke, yes, and a distinct smell of burning plastic. We immediately removed Archie from the room. Of course, he was perfectly unharmed, perhaps a little startled by the commotion, but otherwise fine. The resident staff acted swiftly. The heater was dealt with. The investigator leaned forward. And the Duchess's reaction upon her return? Ms. Davies paused, choosing her words with deliberate care. When the Duchess and Duke returned and were informed of the incident, the Duchess's immediate response was, not what I, as a childcare professional with many years of experience, would have anticipated from a mother in that situation. Meghan's eyes, which had been downcast, snapped up, a dangerous glint within them. Harry's hand reached out, a silent plea for calm, but she subtly shrugged it off. Her first words? Miss, Davies continued, seemingly unfazed by the Duchess's silent fury, were not, is Archie all right? Or let me see my son. Her first, almost breathless question, directed at her private secretary, was, who knows about this? Has this leaked to the press? A collective, albeit suppressed, gasp seemed to ripple through the observers in the room. Even Meghan's own legal counsel looked momentarily disconcerted. She was agitated, highly agitated. Miss, Davies elaborated, pacing the room. Her voice was sharp, verging on hysterical. This cannot get out. They will twist this. This is a disaster. Prince Harry, to his credit, immediately went to Archie, checked on him, held him. He kept trying to reassure the Duchess. Meghan, he's fine. Look, he's perfectly all right. That's all that matters. But she barely seemed to register Archie's presence. It was as if, Miss, Davies added, her gaze piercing. The primary concern was not the potential danger to her child, but the potential damage to their narrative. She was convinced, or at least vocally convinced, that this was not an accident. This was deliberate, she exclaimed at one point. Someone is trying to sabotage this tour. Someone is trying to make us look like incompetent parents. The former nanny then described a scene of escalating paranoia. The Duchess demanded an immediate internal investigation. She wanted every member of the resident staff, every local aide, every member of their own touring party, to be questioned. She insisted on seeing phone records. She spoke repeatedly of betrayal and disloyalty. She even, for a moment, seemed to suspect the junior nanny and myself. It was an extraordinary and, frankly, unnerving display. Harry, throughout this portion, looked increasingly wretched. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, his eyes pleading with his wife to intervene, to stop this. But Meghan remained a statue of icy fury, her distress now manifesting as a steely, almost predatory, Focus on Ms. Davies. The public narrative that emerged later, Miss Davies stated. The one where the Duchess bravely carried on with her duties despite being shaken and in tears over her son's narrow escape. That narrative, from my direct observation, was a carefully constructed piece of theater. Yes, she was distraught, but her distress seemed overwhelmingly centered on the Parr implications, not on maternal fear. The investigator interjected. Ms. Davies, you understand that's a serious allegation. To suggest the Duchess's maternal distress was not genuine? I understand perfectly. Miss Davies replied, her voice firm. I am recounting what I saw, what I heard, and the conclusions a reasonable person in my position would draw. A mother whose child has just been in a room with a smoking, malfunctioning heater typically wants to hold that child, to comfort that child, to ensure that child feels safe. The Duchess's priority appeared to be damage control. She was more concerned with the optics than with Archie's actual experience. She even said, and I recall this vividly, we cannot look weak. We have to go out there and be strong. We have to show them they can't break us. The room was heavy with the weight of these revelations. The image of Meghan, the compassionate activist, the devoted mother, was being systematically dismantled. Ms. Davies then detailed the subsequent demands and changes Meghan insisted upon, using the nursery incident as justification. The existing royal protection officers, highly trained and experienced, were suddenly deemed insufficient or compromised. The Duchess demanded an entirely new, privately sourced security team for Archie, answerable only to her and the Duke. These were individuals, often American, with no prior experience in royal protection, creating immediate friction with the established palace security apparatus. She also insisted, Miss Davies continued, that Archie's exposure to anyone outside their immediate, hand-picked circle be severely curtailed. Naps were to be in rooms with no external windows, or windows blacked out. Walks in the garden were to be under the strictest, almost covert, conditions. It felt less like protecting a baby and more like guarding a state secret. Prince Harry, while clearly wanting his son safe, seemed increasingly weary of the escalating demands and the atmosphere of constant suspicion his wife was cultivating. The former nanny described how Meghan would meticulously review press clippings and social media commentary about the tour, becoming fixated on any perceived slight or negative undertone. The fire incident became a recurring theme in her private conversations. Miss Davies noted, not as a moment of gratitude that Archie was safe, but as proof of the forces working against them. You see, Harry, she would say, this is what we're up against. They will stop at nothing. This, Miss Davies suggested, was the true genesis of the victim narrative that would later define so much of the Sussex's public discourse. The nursery fire, a mundane household mishap, was twisted and magnified into an act of aggression, a symbol of the persecution Meghan felt. It was also, Miss Davies added, a chilling edge to her voice, the moment I believe the Duchess realized the power of Archie as a narrative tool, a vulnerable baby, a near tragedy. These were potent ingredients for eliciting public sympathy and for justifying their increasing desire for privacy and control, which often translated into demands for special treatment and a departure from established royal norms. The deposition explored further incidents where Meghan's behavior seemed to prioritize image over substance, or where Archie was, perhaps unwittingly, drawn into the couple's ongoing battles with the media and the institution. Miss Davies recounted an instance where a planned, informal photo opportunity with Archie and local children was abruptly canceled by Meghan at the last minute because the lighting was unflattering, and she felt the photographer was too intrusive. Despite the photographer being a long-standing, respected Royal Rota member, the children were left disappointed. The organizers embarrassed, Miss Davies said, but the Duchess was more concerned about not having control over the images. Harry's discomfort was now palpable. He shifted in his seat, cleared his throat, and shot a desperate, pleading look at his wife, who remained impassive, her gaze locked on Ms. Davies with an intensity that could only be described as hostile. The narrative of Meghan as the fiercely protective mother, while undoubtedly containing elements of truth, was also, in my observation, a carefully managed performance. Miss, Davies stated. A performance where the lines between genuine maternal concern and strategic PR often became disturbingly blurred. The Africa tour, and specifically the nursery fire incident, was, I believe, a crucible where these tendencies were forged and solidified. Ms. Davies then spoke of the emotional toll this environment took on Prince Harry.
The Duke loves his wife.
That is undeniable, and he adores his son. But I saw a man increasingly isolated from his own family, from his lifelong support system, constantly trying to navigate the Duchess's anxieties and demands, while also grappling with his own unresolved traumas. He often looked lost, burdened. The joy and spontaneity that had once defined him seemed to be ebbing away, replaced by a kind of weary resignation. The final portion of this segment of Miss Davies' deposition focused on her decision to leave the Sussexes' employ. It wasn't one single event, she clarified. It was an accumulation, an atmosphere I found increasingly untenable. The constant suspicion, the us against the world mentality, the feeling that even the most innocuous actions could be misconstrued or weaponized. And frankly, the growing unease I felt about the way young Archie's life was being curated rather than simply lived. When I tendered my resignation, Miss Davies concluded, her voice tinged with a profound sadness. The Duchess's reaction was not one of concern or regret, but of suspicion. She asked me, point blank, if I had been approached by the palace or the press, if I was being paid to leave. That, for me, encapsulated everything. Even a simple, personal decision was viewed through the prism of conspiracy and betrayal. As Ms. Davies fell silent, the weight of her words hung heavy in the room. The image of Meghan Markle, the global icon of compassion and empowerment, had been dealt a severe blow. In its place was a portrait of a woman allegedly driven by paranoia, obsessed with control, and willing to manipulate even the narrative around her own child's safety to serve her agenda. Prince Harry, the renegade royal, appeared less a hero of his own story and more a captive, caught in a gilded cage of his wife's making. The deposition was far from over. More palace secrets were undoubtedly yet to be spilled. But already, the foundation of the Sussexes' carefully constructed truth was showing cracks so deep, so fundamental, that one had to wonder if anything could ever truly repair the damage. The distraught Duchess, as portrayed by Ms. Davies, was a far more complex and far more troubling figure than the world had ever imagined, and the Africa tour incident, once a mere footnote, now loomed as a terrifying premonition of the drama and division that was to come.